The wind does not weep for the tree it breaks, nor does time offer apology for the skin it wears away, one wrinkle at a time. There is no kindness in reality, only indifference dressed in stillness. And yet, in that stillness, a silence speaks a voice without words, echoing not from above, but from deep within, beneath the brittle scaffolding of our illusions. We begin not with hope, but with a question so old it has forgotten its name. What is the point of all this suffering? The answer does not lie in the stars, nor in the blind hands of fate. It lies here, in the hollow between your ribs, where desire stirs like a parasite, uninvited, uncontrollable, and sovereign. You do not choose your hunger. It arrives like weather, unannounced, unreasoning, and you mistake it for identity. But there is no you that commands the will. There is only the will, and the illusion of a captain riding the storm it cannot steer. You are not the author of your longings. They are older than you. They have no language. They want, and you obey. Watch the infant scream, red-faced, fists clenched, not from logic, but from the tyrant's lash of need. That same cry echoes through your years in different forms: love, ambition, jealousy, despair. Sophisticated packaging, same scream. The will is blind, ceaseless, and insatiable. It devours peace in order to reanimate itself. In pleasure, it sees only a brief interruption of pain. In desire, the endless multiplication of lack. Even in moments of quiet, your mind itches forward, seeking. For what? You cannot say. But still it seeks. Not because it is curious, but because it is enslaved to a longing that offers no fulfillment, only movement. The will survives not through satisfaction, but through the constant postponement of satisfaction. Modernity cloaks this cycle in shimmering garments. It calls the chase self-actualization. It flatters your compulsions with sacred names, dreams, goals, passions. But what is ambition if not a glorified form of suffering? To want is to be wounded. To strive is to bleed, elegantly, and yet we adorn these wounds with medals. The world promises much, but delivers only the echo of your own projections. What you love is not the object, but the fantasy you drape upon it. And once touched, the object decays, revealing its indifference to your yearning. That which is desired shines only from afar. Possession tarnishes the illusion. And so the cycle renews, not because the world withholds joy, but because the will transforms joy into ash the moment it is grasped. The poet writes for immortality, yet time laughs in the margins of every page. The lover clings to another, hoping to anchor the self in shared warmth, but even the deepest embrace cannot silence the cold knowledge of impermanence. We do not suffer because the world is cruel. We suffer because the world is empty, and we are filled with hunger that mistakes silence for insult. All around us, humanity dances, not in celebration, but in distraction. Consumerism, careerism, romanticism, each a theater, masking the void. The crowd laughs because it must not hear the silence between claps. The phone glows, not because it offers meaning, but because it delays the confrontation with meaninglessness. You are told to be positive, to visualize success, to manifest abundance. These are lullabies sung to an orphaned consciousness. In truth, you are not building anything, you are being used by a will that knows neither satisfaction nor rest. Even in your triumph, the hunger remains, quietly recalibrating, setting its eyes on the next hill, the next thrill, the next promise of peace that will never arrive. Peace does not reside in victory. It resides in the quiet refusal to play the game. But to renounce desire is not to escape suffering. It is to step into a deeper pain, the pain of clarity, the pain of knowing you are not who you thought you were, that your dreams were dreams, that your loves were projections, that even yourself is a shadow stretched thin across the wall of existence. What remains then? Not purpose, not identity, only awareness, cold, luminous, and quiet. It does not comfort. It does not entertain, but it is true. And in a world of illusions, truth, however bitter, is the only sacred thing. You do not choose your desires, they choose you. They wear your face and speak in your voice, but they are not yours. They are the strings, you are the puppet. And freedom, if it exists at all, lies not in chasing better strings, but in seeing the strings for what they are. Let the others dance. Let them sing of dreams and destiny. You, who have tasted the bitter wine of awareness, sit in the shadows and watch. Not with bitterness, not with disdain, but with the quiet sorrow of one who sees the stage and the scaffolding, the mask and the void beneath it. This is not nihilism. This is not despair. This is clarity, the first light after a long fever. The fever of becoming, of chasing, of believing. Let it break, let it fall, and in its ruin, listen. The silence is not empty, it is honest. Suffering is not the exception, but the rule. The background music of existence is not joy, but strain the inaudible pull of entropy, tugging at every nerve, every thought, every breath. And though the forms vary, the loneliness of success, the ache of unrequited longing, the dull corrosion of boredom, the essence remains. To exist is to hurt. Not always dramatically, but always persistently, like a ceiling drip whose sound becomes the measure of time. The world, in its motion, never ceases. But this motion is not progress, it is unrest. Rivers do not flow toward contentment, but toward dissolution. Trees grow, bloom, fall, and rot, not in triumph, but in obedience to a cycle that cares not for the poetry we attach to it. So too, the human heart pumps not with glory, but with necessity. And every heartbeat is the ticking of a clock winding down. Desire paints mirages on the walls of the cave, and we chase them not because we are fools, but because we are compelled. The animal within does not seek meaning, it seeks satiation. And the mind, that late evolving parasite of consciousness, simply narrates the chase with noble lies. We are not guided by reason, but by rationalizations sewn over instinct, like thin linen over bone. It is no accident that joy is fleeting. Its brevity is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. Pleasure exists only long enough to prolong the striving. Were it to last, it would undermine the very engine of the will. And so it withers quickly, like dew that vanishes under the indifferent sun. We call it life, but it is more accurately the theater of unsatisfied yearning. Detachment is not a moral stance, but a natural consequence of seeing. When you truly see the endless puppetry of the will, how it masquerades as love, ambition, conviction, you do not condemn it, but you cease to participate. The game continues, but you sit at the edge of the board, watching the pieces move themselves. It is not resignation, it is the sobering of the soul. Illusion is not merely falsehood, it is structure. Without it, society crumbles. The myths of progress, purpose, romance, self-worth, these are the scaffolds that hold up the house of human activity. Strip them away, and the walls fall. But those who dare to look behind the plaster, to see the crumbling bricks, understand the house was never meant to shelter, only to distract. No one truly wants the truth. They want comfort dressed as truth, a truth that flatters, that affirms, that softens the terror of being. But the real truth does none of these. It strips, it reveals, and it does not apologize. To see it is to feel the cold wind of the infinite pass through the corridors of the finite. And to keep looking is the beginning of liberation, not because it saves, but because it no longer deceives. What does it mean to live without illusion? Not to be free from pain, but to be free from the false promise of its end. The world cannot be fixed because it was never broken. It simply is restless, mindless, turning. To accept this is not to fall into despair, but to stop resisting the river. You do not have to swim, you do not have to drown. You simply let go and watch the current. Take what it will. Even the self is not what it pretends to be. It is not a solid thing, but a flicker, a bundle of impressions, memories, impulses. It shifts with context, with mood, with time. To cling to identity is to grasp at smoke. And yet, most lives are built upon this scaffolding of vapor, defended with vehemence, mourned when lost. But who mourns the morning fog when it dissolves into the sun? Time does not wait, not because it is cruel, but because it is indifferent. You may weep or rejoice, fight or yield, it passes the same. And every passing moment eats a portion of you, not with malice, but with inevitability. To live is to be consumed by time. And yet we pretend otherwise, filling our calendars with plans, our mirrors with resistance, our conversations with denial. There is a beauty in facing this, a terrible, aching beauty, like watching the ocean swallow a cathedral. It is not uplifting, it is honest. And in that honesty, something stirs not hope, but a kind of sacred weariness. A knowledge that nothing is owed, nothing secured, and yet you are here, breathing, watching, knowing. Love, too, becomes clear under this light, not as salvation, but as the will's most exquisite bait. It promises wholeness, completion, escape, and delivers brief ecstasy followed by new forms of suffering. To love is to tether yourself to impermanence, to make a home in something that cannot stay. And yet, even in its futility, it holds a strange nobility, for, in choosing to love, we expose our deepest illusion to the storm. Modern life intensifies the delusion. It sells escape as freedom, stimulation as meaning. It wraps emptiness in entertainment, despair in productivity. You are told to chase the next upgrade, the next follower, the next dopamine hit, not because it matters, but because motion must be mistaken for purpose, lest the machine stall. But behind every screen flicker, every curated smile, lies the same silent cry. Is this all? The answer, unspoken, is yes. This is all. There is no great revelation, no final arrival. The mountain has no summit. But this is not cruelty. It is nature. And when you see it, really see it, something within begins to quiet. The mind stops racing. The chest loosens. The compulsion fades. Not into bliss, but into stillness. In that stillness, you begin to hear the quiet truth. That most of what you feared never truly threatened you. That most of what you desired was never truly yours. That even your suffering, vast as it feels, is not unique. It is the echo of a shared condition, the inheritance of all who bear the curse of consciousness. There is no salvation, only awareness. No heaven, only the refusal to dream of one. No future, only the unraveling of now. And this is enough, not because it satisfies, but because it frees. The bird in the open cage no longer sings to be released. It sings because it no longer believes in cages. Silence deepens where the noise of promises fades. When the marketplace of human longing quiets, what remains is not peace, but exposure, a bareness of soul, like a tree stripped of its leaves, standing against the cold truth of wind. Here, in this uncloaked state, the self can no longer pretend. It trembles not from fear, but from the sudden recognition that it was never more than a shadow cast by want. The world offers names. It offers positions, narratives, belonging, but these are costumes for the abyss. To be someone is to stitch a mask from memories, to draw a boundary around flux and call it identity. Yet beneath every mask, the same void gazes back, not malevolently, just without interest. It is the quiet indifference of reality to the names we give it. People say they want freedom, but what they truly seek is comfort within their cage. For freedom means the collapse of familiar walls, the vanishing of ground beneath the feet. It is not liberation from constraints, but from meaning itself, and such a release terrifies, for it asks, who are you when there is nothing left to cling to? Most would rather suffer than answer. Religion once softened this blow, cloaking futility in celestial narratives. But now, with God drowned beneath the weight of proof and silence, humanity kneels at new altars: productivity, identity, pleasure, visibility. Each a new mythology, hollow at the core, kept alive only by collective pretending. We do not believe, we perform belief, because to admit the void is to risk madness. Yet even madness has its logic. To break under truth is sometimes more honest than to endure through lies. The world calls the melancholic broken, but perhaps it is the cheerful who are asleep, narcotized by novelty, distracted by desire. The melancholic sees clearly, and clarity is a heavy thing. It does not uplift, it anchors. You look at others, their celebrations, their pursuits, and wonder if they have something you lack. But they are wondering the same. Every soul carries its own invisible burden, shaped differently, but made of the same lead. To live is to wear this weight. And all that differs is the elegance with which one carries it. Even laughter can be a disguise. Not all joy is false, but much of it is defensive, an attempt to stave off the return of meaninglessness. For silence is never far. It waits patiently at the edges of noise, at the pause between sentences, the end of songs, the still moment before sleep. It is the original condition from which all illusion flees. Suffering clarifies, not because it teaches, but because it strips away. When everything else falls pride, hope, distraction, what remains is raw being. And though it is painful, it is also honest. In that naked moment, you meet yourself without story. And you see, you were never the protagonist. You were the flicker, the echo, the tremor of a will that speaks through you but is not yours. The will, that tyrant dressed in your skin, compels without reason. It invents desire, paints it with urgency, and calls it destiny. But no desire is final. Once fed, it breeds new hungers. You think you are chasing fulfillment, but what you chase is movement itself. The illusion that forward means better. The treadmill becomes the altar. And you, its kneeling worshipper, offer your hours like prayers. Eventually, you begin to suspect that what you call life is a loop, not a circle of growth, but of recurrence, different masks, same emptiness. And so arises the longing not for more, but for less. Less desire, less noise, less self. This is not nihilism. It is not despair. It is the beginning of detachment, not as rejection, but as recognition. The recognition that striving was never the cure. Love loses its illusions too. At first, it sparkles with the hope of fusion, two selves becoming one, finally whole. But no two mirrors can merge without shattering. Love reveals not unity, but the solitude of all consciousness. To love is to reach across a chasm with trembling hands, knowing they will never fully touch. And still you reach. Not for salvation, but because something in you remembers the warmth before individuation. Loneliness is not a flaw in the human condition, it is the human condition. Connection is brief, partial, and always tinged with the ache of separation. Even in the arms of another, you are alone with your thoughts. And perhaps the most honest love is the one that acknowledges this, that says, I cannot save you, but I will sit with you in the dark. You may wonder what remains when all illusions are laid bare. Not happiness, not purpose, but presence, a still attention to what is, without the need to make it otherwise. It is not joyful, but it is real. And reality, though cold, is sacred in its unflinching clarity. The sacred is not what soothes, it is what endures scrutiny. Death, too, becomes clearer, not as a monster, but as the end of striving, the final cessation, the release from the tyranny of the will. We fear it because we are taught to love the chase. But for those who have seen through the chase, death is not terrifying, it is neutral, a return, not to nothingness, but to the absence of need. There are moments rare, quiet, when the mind stops hungering. A leaf falls, a cloud moves across the face of the sun, a breath passes through the body, unresisted. In such moments, the will sleeps. And for a flicker, you are not a self, not a name, not a story. You are simply a witness. And in that witnessing, there is peace. Not the peace of achievement, but the peace of surrender. The body still aches, the world still turns, but you no longer demand it be different. You see, and in seeing, you are no longer captive. The will may speak, but you do not answer. The desire may knock, but you do not open the door. You sit in the dim light of truth, and it is enough. There is no final wisdom, no secret key. Only this, to see clearly, to suffer consciously, and to loosen the grip. Not to fix, but to let fall, to die before death. Not in body, but in attachment. For only when the self dissolves can the world be seen without distortion. And what a world! It is cruel, fleeting, indifferent, and inexplicably beautiful in its starkness. Like a deserted temple, weathered by time, standing not for worship, but for witnessing. You walk through it alone, touching the stone, feeling the cold, hearing your footsteps echo, and for a moment, you do not ask why, you simply walk. There is a moment, quiet as a breath beneath grief, when one no longer seeks to be understood. When the words of others, the consolations, the philosophies, even the protests of hope lose their weight. It is not despair that speaks here, it is weariness. The soul has labored beneath the scaffolding of desire for too long, and now it rests, not in triumph, but in the unadorned presence of being. To be seen is a modern obsession visibility, mistaken for worth. recognition for existence. But the more one is seen, the less one remains. Identity becomes a performance, curated for the gaze, and the self fragments under the glare. In the shadows, however, something remains untouched, the part of you that has no need for audience. The silent witness. It does not ask to be known, it simply observes. Truth begins there, not in the marketplace of affirmation, but in solitude. Not the solitude of loneliness, but of inwardness, the solitude that remains even in crowds, even in arms, even in prayer. It is the space within that nothing can fill, not because it is broken, but because it is whole in its emptiness. That space is not a void, it is clarity. Suffering, when seen clearly, loses its venom, not because it ceases to hurt, but because it ceases to lie. The lie was that pain had a purpose, that if you bore it long enough, it would redeem itself. But pain is not a teacher, it is a mirror. It shows you where you are bound, where you have clung, where you have mistaken shadow for substance. And when you no longer ask it for lessons, it quietly reveals everything. The illusion of control is perhaps the deepest root of torment. To believe that one can manage the will, discipline it, redirect it, this is the fantasy of the rational mind. But the will is not a horse to be ridden, it is a flood. It moves through you, bends your thoughts, colors your dreams, compels your betrayals. And when it has used you, it leaves you to carry the weight of choices that were never truly yours. Freedom, in the deepest sense, is not the assertion of will, but the cessation of identification with it. To watch the desire rise and not be moved. To hear the craving speak and not respond. This is not repression, it is transcendence. The fire still burns, but you no longer throw yourself into it. Modernity, in its clever cruelty, has given us tools of endless distraction. Screens that flicker, voices that flatter, promises that sparkle and vanish. We scroll, we consume, we perform, all to avoid the terror of stopping. For to stop is to confront the silence within. And in that silence, the questions come not from intellect, but from the marrow. What am I? Why am I always wanting? Why does nothing stay? These are not questions to be answered. They are wounds to be witnessed. And in their witnessing, something shifts. The need to be someone fades. The compulsion to become dissolves. You remain not as a role or a narrative, but as an awareness, naked, unstoried, unpossessed. The ego dies many small deaths before the body ever does. People speak of healing, as if the self were a project to be completed. But what if there is nothing to fix? What if the cracks are the truth, and the search for wholeness is the final disguise of the will? To heal, in the truest sense, is not to restore the mask, but to discard it. To no longer fear the face beneath, however marked by time and sorrow. In grief, there is clarity. When the world you built crumbles through loss, betrayal, aging, you see the foundations. And they were always made of dust. This is not tragedy, it is revelation. The loss is not of love, or success, or youth. It is the loss of illusion, and though it breaks you, it also frees you from the prison of unreality. Do not confuse this with bitterness. The bitter cling to the past. The awakened let it go, not because they have risen above it, but because they have passed through it. Like fire through dry grass, the truth burns away everything that is not essential. And what remains is not hope, it is stillness. You may still act, you may still love, but the fever is gone, the desperate edge, the clutching hand all softened. You move through the world like wind through trees, touching but not clinging, present but not imprisoned. The will may still whisper, but it no longer commands. You have heard its voice and seen where it leads. There are no answers here, only observations, only the slow, steady quieting of the need to ask. You sit by the river of becoming and watch it pass. You do not reach into it, you do not demand it flow another way, you simply watch. And in that watching, a different kind of peace emerges, not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of no longer needing to be filled. This is what it means to awaken, not to become more, but to become less, to unburden the self of its vanities, its stories, its sacred ambitions, to descend not into despair, but into lucidity, to exchange the flame of striving for the cool light of awareness. And in that light, everything looks different. Even suffering, once feared, becomes sacred. For it was the gateway, it was the chisel that broke the stone. Without it, you would still be asleep, dreaming of permanence in a world built on dissolution. You would still be chasing meaning, blind to the fact that meaning is not found, it is made and unmade and ultimately relinquished. And so you arrive, not at an ending, but at a space without need. You do not crave answers, you do not flee pain, you do not worship pleasure, you breathe, you observe, you endure. And in this, there is a dignity not conferred by the world, but by the simple act of being awake within it. What remains when the striving ends is not emptiness, but a different fullness, a fullness without content, like the sky unburdened of clouds. You walk without seeking, speak without persuading, breathe without hope, and in this absence, something ancient stirs, not joy, not relief, but a quiet recognition. The self has died, and what remains is only that which cannot be lost. You sit by the window of the world and watch it turn. Births and deaths pass like seasons, and none of it touches you, not because you are numb, but because you are no longer the one who grasped. You see clearly now. To grasp is to bleed, to love is to lose, and to possess is to be possessed. You let the world be what it island. You do not demand beauty, and so you see it everywhere. The faces around you still perform their parts, the hurried, the hopeful, the hungry. You no longer resent them, you no longer envy them, you understand. They are still in the storm of becoming, still mistaking motion for meaning. Their pain is sacred too, for it will lead them, as it led you, to this cold, white plain where nothing grows, but where everything can be seen. Time passes through you, like wind through glass. You do not follow it, you do not mark it. The days rise and fall, like waves against the shore you no longer try to defend. There is no progress, no decline, only unfolding. And you, no longer the sailor, become the tide itself. In this stillness, even language begins to wither. Words fall away. The need to explain, to impress, to justify all vanish like mist. Silence becomes your native tongue, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer believe in answers. What could you say that the mountains do not already whisper? What truth could you offer that the stars have not already forgotten? You remember once believing that your suffering made you unique, but now you see it was the most universal thing about you. To suffer is not to fail, it is to be. The bird suffers the winter, the stone suffers the river, the tree suffers the sky. All things bear the weight of being, and in that weight you are finally equal to everything. You do not need forgiveness, you do not need redemption, you do not need to become. You are not a project, you are not a purpose. You are the brief awareness of a flame that never asked to be lit. And in knowing this, you no longer curse the fire, you let it burn. This is not transcendence. It is not awakening, it is not peace. It is simply the end of asking for more than what island. You walk through the ruins of your desires and feel nothing but the soft earth beneath your feet. You are not healed, you are not whole. You are here, and the world, without your needing it to be different, becomes luminous in its sadness. A dog barking in the distance, the smell of rain on dust, a child's shoe abandoned in the street. Nothing lasts. Nothing satisfies. Nothing is enough. And in this nothingness, you find a calm that does not rejoice, but no longer resists. You sit by the river's edge one final time. The sun lowers itself without drama. The water does not pause to be witnessed. You have no need to speak, no need to hold, no need to leave a mark. You were here, you saw, you bore it. And now the wind moves through you like a final thought that never needed words.